We have Chris Hennings with us with the Panora Conservation Chapter and several other organizations. She is co-hosting this evening and she'll be helping out in the with our question and answer and so forth. And I'd like to welcome everybody to our March 17th Watershed Talks. My name is Christine Curry, and I'm the outreach coordinator of the Izaak Walton League's Iowa division. And we're super thrilled to have everybody here this evening. And our special guest, Dan Haug, Haug, I never say that,
Haug.
Dan. Okay, thank you. It's not easy being green. What's on Iowa's 2026 Impaired Waters list? Um, Dan has a great way of updating others through social media with what's happening on with Iowa's water. So we're super grateful that he's taken out to share with us what's going on. Uh, for the past 9 years, he's been working on watershed projects, environmental education, water monitoring efforts across Iowa. His practical experience and clear communication style help connect science, policy, and community action in ways that empower everyday Iowans. So we are happy you're here with us this evening because obviously you care about clean water, healthy communities, and informed action. And this St. Patrick's Day conversation will give you something truly worth celebrating. So without further ado, I'm going to let Dan take it away. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box and we'll go from there. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Christine. Are you seeing a full screen view? Okay.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
So happy St. Patrick's Day. This is the one time of year when a green river might just be a harmless vegetable dye like it is in Chicago. And I think there was probably a lot of people this weekend getting impaired at the bars to celebrate the festivities, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Iowa's impaired list when green water is not intentional. Could be a sign of a toxic algae bloom. And the phrase impaired waters comes from the Clean Water Act. It's sometimes called the Section 303D list because it comes from Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. And tonight I'm going to be your Clean Water Act translator because there's a lot of jargon that gets used in here. And so the format I'm going to use is we'll have a plain language translation up at the top, and then some of the legalese in the typewriter font. And so impaired waters means a lake or river segment that does not meet its water quality criteria for a designated use. But the English translation of that is it's just not clean enough for good fishing, swimming, or drinking. And so, there's really a practical meaning to this that is about how we use our lakes and rivers. Yeah, so then this you'll see this format throughout here. So in Iowa example, and here's the map of the 2026 impaired waters list, the legal terms in the typewriter font, and then the plain language translation. I'll start with sharing a little bit about me and then walk through how this assessment process is supposed to work, and then some of the ways that waters get stuck along the way. Why do they stay on the impaired list and don't get off? And then we'll circle back around to what's the cause of that green stuff in the water, and then give you a sense for how impaired are Iowa's waters. And this is a timely topic because the Iowa DNR just released the draft of their 2026 impairment, and it looks like we have another 2 days to make public comment. So, after this, hopefully you'll have a little bit better understanding of how the process works, and then can go look up your local waters and then send the DNR a note about, if you think the classification is wrong for your local waters, or you're just upset that they're still on this list and why aren't we doing something about it. It's a good opportunity for people to make their voices heard. A little bit about me. I work for Prairie Rivers of Iowa. We are one of several RC&D, resource conservation and development organizations around the state. Some of them have gone out of business, but there's still quite a few Golden Hills and South West Iowa, Northeast Iowa RC&D. Pathfinders RC&D, still doing economic development and conservation projects. We've done a lot of different things over the years: school garden, forestry, local foods programs. And right now we have three main programs: managing the Lincoln Highway Heritage Byway and the Iowa Valley Scenic Byway. Telling the story of those towns and businesses and the historic resources on those byways, supporting pollinator conservation, and then water quality. And I've been with Prairie Rivers of Iowa for 9 years, doing a lot of different things. Some public education and outreach, some water monitoring in the stream, a lot of making sense of all this mess of data that we have available. And actually, this is going to be my last month with Prairie Rivers. I am starting a new job as the watershed coordinator for Story County. So going to be working a lot on some of the same projects and in the same area. So you'll still see me a lot and talking about water quality, just in a little different capacity. And I got into this learning about the Clean Water Act through this video series I did for the 50th anniversary. So I guess at the end of the talk, I can put the link in the chat, but we have on our Prairie Rivers of Iowa YouTube channel, we have a series of 50 facts about the Clean Water Act, and a lot of them have a little song or a funny skit or something to make it digestible. And so, learning about this process, I've gotten a sense for how this process works and how it doesn't work. So the goal of the Clean Water Act was to achieve water quality, which provides for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and provides for recreation in and on the water by July 1, 1983. And we missed that deadline, but still a lot of good was done through the Clean Water Act, and a lot of rivers that used to be flammable or completely unusable have gotten cleaned up, but we still have a lot of a long ways to go. But fishable and swimmable is kind of the shorthand for this, and that's really what this is all about. And so every 2 years, the Iowa DNR is required to report to the EPA on which waters are fishable and swimmable. And so the 303D list is part of that, but there's a larger assessment of evaluating which waters are clean enough to support those uses. And so there's a process that this goes through. The first question you have to ask is could it be swimmable? There are some creeks that are probably too shallow for anyone to go water skiing or swimming. And so the designated uses: primary contact, secondary contact, children's use for recreation are those different categories depending on how deep is the water, if there's public access. And then the next question to ask is, how clean does it need to be for swimming? And so those are your water quality criteria. So there's a lot of different things that the DNR can measure to evaluate swimming. And so one of the main ones that we measure is E. coli. And that's a bacteria that's present in the guts of humans and livestock and waterfowl, anything warm-blooded. And so it's an indicator of poop in the water. And so there's a different standard for primary contact waters, where you're more likely to dunk your head under and maybe swallow a gulp of water by accident, versus secondary contact, where it's a shallow creek and that's less likely. Then we also have a set of designated uses for aquatic life. And so the question we're asking here is, could it be fishable? Bigger rivers are more likely to be able to support game fish, where a shallow intermittent stream might not have enough water, regardless of how clean it is, to support game fish or a diverse fishery. And different kinds of water, a trout stream in northeast Iowa is going to be able to support different kinds of fish than a warm water stream in central Iowa. So could it be fishable is the first question. And then how clean does it need to be for good fishing? So we have water quality criteria to evaluate. Okay, dissolved oxygen can't go below 5 milligrams per liter. Ammonia can't go too high.
I'm looking for I've got pictures, but
ammonia can't go too high, or it'll kill the fish. If it's a trout stream, the temperature can't get too warm, or it's going to kill the trout. And then we also just look at all the different species that are out there, both the fish and the invertebrates that they eat. So those are some of the things that go into it. There's a few other designated uses that sometimes come up. So, if you have fish, is it safe to eat the fish? So this only applies to waters that get more heavy fishing use, and they evaluate it by
Sure.
measuring mercury and other contaminants that accumulate in fish tissue and can make people sick if it's accumulating as you go up the food chain and you get too much of it. So, recommendations to only eat, so many meals a month of, your musky, your larger fish species. That's where that comes from. So we put all that together, and for any given water, we might be evaluating four of these different designated uses. And you can have a water body like here's Clear Lake that doesn't support recreational use. The bacteria levels are too high. The water's too muddy for good swimming at some points of the year. But it does fully support aquatic life. So you can kind of get a mix and match. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that even if a water body is impaired for one use, it might still support other uses. And there can be degrees of impairment. And if you dig in a little bit further, you can see all the data that they use to come up with these to make these determinations. So here for Clear Lake, we have 3 years of bacteria data, which shows some problems. pH was fine, and then several measures of nutrient enrichment. Trophic state index was what TSI stands for, but just sort of a bunch of different metrics for how green the lake is likely to get. One thing to keep in mind is that the impaired waters list isn't a keep out sign. So Clear Lake, for example, I went there during the assessment period. There was not a beach advisory when I visited. There were for 5 of the 15 weeks of summer, but not for the other 10. And I had a perfectly good and safe time with my family. So, something to keep in mind is like even the worst waters have their good days. And so it's less about, being a keep out sign. There's a different set of, warnings and beach monitoring for that. What the impaired waters list is it's a waiting list for a cleanup plan. The cleanup plan might be called a water quality improvement plan or a TMDL, which stands for total maximum daily load. So it's essentially a pollution budget to figure out how do we meet those beneficial uses? How do we make it swimmable and fishable? How low does phosphorus need to get, and what are our best options for getting it low enough that it's not going to be a problem? You'll see on the assessment website that there's 2 different categories depending on whether this cleanup plan has been completed. So, Clear Lake has gone through a plan for both the algae issues and the bacteria issues. And it's going to remain on the Clean Waters Act until there's been enough monitoring to show improvements. But there is this different category. So also worth noting that some waters do come off the impaired waters list. The Clean Water Act does include some funding for watershed improvement projects, and there have been a few instances where after a lot of practices in the watershed, a lot of monitoring, they have been able to demonstrate improvement and waters have come off. But that's not common enough. A lot of times waters will get stuck somewhere along this process. One sticking point is that often we don't have data. So generally only about 50% of our lakes and wetland or our rivers and wetlands and 41% of our lakes have been assessed. There's a lot of water bodies in Iowa, and DNR doesn't have the resources to monitor them all. Now, one would think that with all the volunteer efforts and all the local watershed monitoring projects that we have going on, that they'd be able to use some of that data. So, for example, I've been working closely with the City of Ames and Story County Conservation to monitor some rivers that DNR has never gotten around to monitoring in Story County, including some that get a lot of use, like Iowa Creek in Ames, West Indian Creek in Nevada. But there's this credible data law that the legislature, in their wisdom, passed that often means that that our data doesn't get fully used. So instead, you'll find those waters that I monitor on the list of waters in need of further investigation. So the data is still publicly available, but it's just in this sort of no man's land. Sometimes we have credible data, but we don't have a standard to evaluate it. So this has been something that the Iowa Environmental Council has been pushing on for a long time. Why don't we have a number threshold for phosphorus, nitrogen, microcystin, an algae toxin in our lakes. We have some narrative standards for, it can't get too green. There are these indexes that they kind of look at to get at it indirectly, but on its own, high levels of phosphorus is not going to land a lake on the impaired waters list, even though we often have the data. Another sticking point, which standard do you apply? There was a loophole that was closed through, in part through the efforts of Steve Vasey, in 2008, where there was all these streams that were classified as general use, and so they sort of didn't get as much protection as they deserved. And so we have this sort of flipping from innocent until or worthless until proven worthy of protection, and now we flip that to worthy of protection until proven otherwise. But it does mean that there are some streams, like here's one I monitor in Story County, the lovely with the lovely name of Long Dick Creek. It's a pretty shallow stream. There's no public access, so probably if the DNR went out and assessed it, they would classify it as secondary contact. But because there's nobody is discharging wastewater into that stream, there's no real incentive to do that. So it has this sort of asterisk of presumed presumptively primary contact, and so it's actually on the impaired waters list when maybe it shouldn't be. And then the big thing in the news the past couple of years has been about the interpretation of the standards. So the last time around, when the DNR submitted their impaired waters list, there was this controversy of 6 river segments upstream of major metro areas that supply drinking water, to Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, Oskaloosa, Ottumwa, Iowa City. And so the issue here was, how often does nitrate need to exceed the standard to be classified as impaired? So the EPA was saying, even one sample is too much, because that's what the drinking water utilities are having to deal with. They would get, potentially fined or have to do public notice under the Safe Drinking Water Act. But DNR was saying, well, we have this 10% rule, and as long as it's less than 10%, it's fine. So last time around, they were all in that sort of gray zone, and now we have 2 that have come back on the impaired waters list because of high nitrate. Then we have a lot of waters that had been on the impaired waters list for decades and have never had an improvement plan written. So the South Skunk River, where I live in Ames, is one of those. As I said, it's the impaired list is a waiting list for a cleanup plan, and DNR doesn't have the resources to develop these plans, or doesn't have the political will to do much, and so there's a prioritization framework, and the bacteria impairments in rivers are one that tend to get short shrift. So we have a lot of waters that have just been sitting on this list forever. There's some waters where a plan has been done, but it wasn't properly enforced. So, here's a nitrogen, nitrate and E. coli TMDL for the Raccoon River, was done in 2008. And so they figured out, where is the pollution coming from? How much do meat packing plants and sewage treatment plants in that watershed need to adjust their discharges to meet those limits? But there was a bunch of screwy stuff that was done in the development of this plan that I looked into, and ultimately it worked out that the meatpacking plant in Storm Lake could discharge more nitrogen into the river than was coming in the raw wastewater. So it was just the semblance of the appearance of regulation, but not any actual protection. The bigger issue with that TMDL, and I think the reason really that all these waters get stuck somewhere in the process, is that for most of our rivers, the vast majority of the pollution is coming from agricultural runoff. That was one of the big findings of the Central Iowa source water report that came out this year, and rightly got a lot of attention. Some really good science in that. But we already knew that this cleanup plan came out in 2008 and had the same findings. So the problem with the Clean Water Act is there's a specific exemption for agricultural runoff, and so a lot of times, you can go through all this process, but there's no teeth, there's no mechanism for enforcement. So and everything else kind of backs up in the process because of that. So, if we're wanting to address agricultural pollution, then we're kind of stuck with voluntary watershed projects and the like. And often the problem with those projects is that we just, it's voluntary and we don't have enough volunteers. So, there's been a lot of work to improve water quality in the North Raccoon River. We now have 49,000 acres of cover crop in that watershed, but it's 49,000 out of over 1 million acres of cropland, and so it works out to just 4% of the watershed treated and 1%. You might expect a 1% reduction in nitrate. And this is the story that I found over and over again in our watershed project in Iowa Creek. Statewide, it's just very rare that we're able to get that critical mass of practices to be able to expect a big improvement in water quality. Then the final way that things get stuck is sometimes you have a successful project where you actually get some volunteers. And Lake Darling has been through this. They were listed in 1998. They had a cleanup plan done in 2002. They had a big watershed project starting in 1999, and they actually were quite successful. They got 80% of the farmers in the watershed to install sediment ponds and other erosion control measures, and then followed that up with a $16 million lake restoration, dredging, and doing all kinds of improvements. And, they were touting that as a success story because it went from being a brown lake to a clear lake. But then, after that lake restoration was completed, 9 new feedlots with housing 30,000 pigs moved into that 20 square mile watershed. And so now we've gone from a clear lake to a green lake. And there were 6 weeks last summer with toxic algae blooms and 10 weeks last summer with beaches closed due to E. coli. So, this is the frustrating thing, that even when we do everything right, even when we get a lot of volunteers and we've gone through this project, a lot of times we're not addressing the other influences that are counteracting the good and making the problem worse. So this is a really frustrating thing, and this is the result. This is what Lake Darling looked like when I visited in 2024. I have never, outside of Chicago during St. Patrick's Day, I've never seen a water that vivid a shade of green. So let's talk about the green stuff in the water. I made a little cheat sheet for this. There's a lot of green stuff that can be in the water. Some of them are harmless. If it looks like confetti, that's probably just duckweed. It's actually a flowering plant related to peace lilies. They have these like tiny little wind-pollinated flowers. If you see something that looks like a drain clog, kind of stringy, growing on the rocks, and then sometimes it'll get loose and it'll be kind of a glob on the surface of water, that's green algae. It's kind of a distant plant relative. And then if it looks like paint, that's probably cyanobacteria. So some of the first life on Earth was cyanobacteria. They don't have a nucleus, and some of them got captured and became part of plant cells. So some interesting evolutionary history with that. But my basic rule of thumb is if it looks like paint, then want to stay out, because some of these cyanobacteria produce toxins that can make people sick or can kill pets. And it's generally not fun to be in anyway. So it can so sometimes it'll look kind of streaky, like like your rinse station if you were doing an art project, and then where this the wind blows it to the edge of the shore, it'll get kind of gloopy, and then as it dies, it can turn brown. And you can get some interesting weird colors too, like that blue-green color, or even purples. So yeah, it can quite a variety in how cyanobacteria can look, but it does have that kind of pea soup or paint look to it. Some of the things that we can measure to evaluate an algae bloom, there are pigments, like chlorophyll, or there's another one that's only found in blue-green algae that scientists can measure. Microcystin is a toxin that sometimes they produce when they're stressed out. We can measure how deep you can how deep you can see a disc that you lower into the water. So if it's thick enough, you can barely see your shoes if you're standing in shallow water, and various measures for water clarity, the amount of solids in the water, and then um, as the algae do their thing, they can use up the oxygen in the water. So these are kind of some of all the things that we measure. And when I visited Lake Darling, it was kind of over the thresholds for chlorophyll, the green stuff in the water, microcystin, Secchi depth in, and suspended solids, and it was getting close to the danger zone for dissolved oxygen. So those are some of the things that we're worried about that can harm fish, can harm people, can make swimming unpleasant. And then there's some things that we that can contribute to an algae bloom. So nitrogen and phosphorus, both essential plant nutrients that we need to grow crops, but once it gets washed into the river, it can fertilize the algae and cause that bloom. The water temperature and the weather are also very important. Um, so I saw this once with the algae bloom in the Skunk River in Ames. Um, we always have pretty high phosphorus levels in the South Skunk River, high enough to not be limiting um, for algae. But in March 2 years ago, we had this unseasonable warm snap where it got up into the 70s in late February and in March, and the trees hadn't leafed out yet. So you got warm weather, you've got sunlight, you got plenty of nutrients, and so the perfect storm to have an algae bloom. And this only lasted for about a day before it cleared out. And by the time I went out there and tested it, phosphorus was 0. So this is one of the tricky things when you're doing water monitoring, because the algae are using up the nutrients in the water as they grow. Sometimes if you're not out there monitoring often enough, it's easy to miss the kind of instigating event for this. I will say that algae aren't entirely a bad thing. They have they're an important part of the aquatic food web, and there are some interesting projects to kind of harness them for good. So the wastewater treatment plant in Slater has this really innovative system of belts with algae growing on it, and they're removing nutrients from the wastewater and able to harvest that to sell for to fertilizer and cleaning up the water leaving the plant. All right. So lastly, how impaired are Iowa's waters? So it's pretty bad. Of the waters that we've assessed, 70% of our lakes and rivers are on the impaired list, or the waters in need of further investigation list. The main causes for rivers are poop in the water, the indicator bacteria, biological impairments. So, the fish community or the invertebrate community isn't what we're expecting, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes toxins in the fish, sometimes a fish kill. But by far and away, the indicator bacteria is the most common source of impairment in rivers. In lakes, it's more of a mix. We see the algae, we see turbidity, brown water, and sediment in the water, too acid or too alkaline, and then also the poop in the water, the indicator bacteria, and then finally organic enrichment from maybe from wastewater or from manure washed into the water. Iowa has a larger proportion of its rivers with bacteria impairment than most states. There was a study that was done a while ago that found it ranked fourth for what percentage of our streams met were clean enough for recreation. But I think because of this, sometimes people have overreact and will say, I'm never going in a Iowa water body. And it turns out that really we're worse than our neighbors, but there's still a lot of Iowa water bodies that are clean enough to use and that are comparable to some of our neighbors. So, I like to go take my family swimming in lakes when I get a chance. In 2024, we visited Clear Lake. During that time, there would have been a 33% chance of having a beach closure. We also went to a beach on Lake Michigan, and during that time, there was a 25% chance of a beach advisory. So, so I think it's important to recognize both that we do have some more serious problems than our neighbors, and we are not really showing the commitment to changing that. But also that there are still waters that you can enjoy and that that aren't that different from other places you might go visit. The bad news is that the trends in beach advisories for bacteria have been going up over the past few decades. So I think definitely making public comments and trying to see if we can change our rules to do something about this is important. But also there are some basic precautions that you can take to try to keep your head above water, because it's if you get your water in your nose or mouth that you're most likely to swallow germs. Packing hand sanitizer if you take a canoe trip. Staying out of the water if you have a suppressed immune system or an open cut. And then I do want to end on a good note, because I looked at the data and it appears that trends in microcystin advisories, the algae toxins, have been going down. So so Lake Darling has gone back on that list, but maybe there are some other lakes that are getting a little bit cleaner. So it's not all doom and gloom, and I will close with that and take questions.
Wow.
Well,
That's amazing. I'll let Chris take it from here, but thank you so much for that comprehensive overview. You always have a way of just presenting data in a different way, and it's super helpful. And so thank you for taking time to share this with us this evening.
So the first question is from Denise O'Brien. Good to see you, Denise, or at least hear you on Zoom. She asks, what do you think about the aluminum sulfate treatment in Prairie Rose and Green Lake? Those must be down near you, huh? Atlantic area?
Yes, they both are, Harlan and Preston.
All right, thanks. Dan, would you have some comments about that?
I think probably the main criticism of it is that, it's not treating the root problem. It's sort of a quick fix, but I think it's a necessary fix. There's a lot of chemistry with phosphorus that affects how well it binds to, the muck at the bottom of the lake versus getting released into the water. And so there's been some, we even see, like in constructed wetlands, that if the conditions are right, normally phosphorus is being treated by the wetlands, but if at certain times a year when the chemistry goes out of whack, it can get released. And so the alum is altering the chemistry so that more of the phosphorus is bound up in the muck and stays out of the water column. So it seems like a smart thing to do, but I am a little bit frustrated that we're not always, addressing the amount of nutrients that are coming into these lakes.
So are you saying that that there would be other ways to keep the phosphorus out of the water, or there are other treatments that you would recommend?
Just that we should also be managing the land in the watershed to keep phosphorus out of the lakes. But
okay, I thought that's what I heard. Okay.
Yeah, once it gets to that point, I think it is can be a good solution.
Okay. Watershed management, yeah. Thanks, Denise. Anybody else? We can watch for hands raised too if you'd rather do that than type it out. I'll give you a second to raise your hand. That's in the More button. There's a hand raise.
You don't have any questions? Any comments? Yeah, Dr. Jim Pease is with us this evening.
Yeah, Dan, as you know, I've been paddling water trails, or paddling Iowa rivers, 2,200 miles of them for the water trails program for about the last 15 years now. And a few years ago, I was doing a radio program with Charity Nevy about rivers, and she asked me a question. She said, and we were actually in the South Skunk in a canoe. If you were, I don't know if you ever heard that program or not, but so we were paddling down the South Skunk, and she said, "So, what's your recommendation to people? Should they be paddling Iowa rivers or not?" And I said, "I'm not afraid to paddle them. No." But I guess as I look at the increasing incidence of cancer, the high rates of nitrates, the increasing microcystin, not so much in rivers, but occasionally in rivers, um, I would alter my answer today, because things are not getting better; they're getting worse, and I guess I would say to them now. Check locally to see, before you go to paddle. Is that a reasonable answer, do you think, or should I, I've been doing this for the water trails program. We want people to recreate on our rivers, and so I'm torn, between looking at data like this and saying, oh my golly, this is awful, and then saying, well, just be careful you don't ingest the water. I don't
Mhm.
know. So what do you think?
I feel that same tension because if Iowans are afraid to go in our rivers, it's a lot harder to generate that for people to care about rivers, especially the next generation. If kids aren't getting a chance to go out and play in nature, so yeah, I do feel that tension because I do know about some of the risks, and I've been collecting this data, and I like to say the impaired waters list is the tip of a very dirty iceberg because we found high E. coli levels in some rivers that weren't previously monitored. And so yeah, it's a tricky issue. And I guess I'd say one thing is that there's a difference between kind of the kinds of things that'll get you sick if you're paddling, and the kinds of things that'll get you sick if you're drinking a glass of water every day with high nitrate. So nitrate is and PFAS, those are kind of chronic exposure issues. Whereas the uh, you know getting tipping your canoe and getting a mouthful of water that has uh, human or cow or pig poop in it, and I actually just contracted a waterborne illness in this case at a water park. So you're not 100% safe, yeah, indoors either. There's kids whose parents aren't managing their swim diapers appropriately and whatnot, or um, so yeah, it's a tricky thing, and so I think it's really important. Water monitoring is helping us fill some of the gaps, but with rivers, things can change so quickly. A lot of times, by the time we have the data available, the water's gone up or down, and things have changed totally. So it's we can get an idea of on average, is this cleaner or dirtier? But I think it's at a certain point we have to kind of recognize that there may be something in the water, and to take reasonable precautions.
Thanks, Dan. We've got a question from Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen, do you want to ask it?
Sure. I have a question about what do you say to people that when they shouldn't eat fish out of the water? What is the real risk? What if I eat a fish out of an impaired waterway, what am I eating that will make me sick? I mean, I know some of those answers, but it's not just even the short term effect. Maybe something gives me an upset stomach or diarrhea, but what are the long term effects as well if you consistently eat fish? I'm always concerned when I go to Des Moines, I often see people fishing from the bridges, and I'm going to assume they're eating those fish. But how do you explain to them why that's probably not a good idea?
Yeah, and so the issues for fish consumption are a little bit different from the other issues because if you're cooking the fish, um, that's going to kill any bacteria on the surface, just like you'd want to properly cook chicken to avoid salmonella. And the nitrate isn't a concern in the fish tissue. So the issue there are the chemicals that can kind of accumulate in fatty tissue and will become more concentrated as you go up the food chain. So mercury is the one that we've known about for the longest. And there's some kind of counterintuitive things. I once looked up, hey, is it any worse to eat fish that, a bass that I catch out of the South Skunk River versus a bass that I catch in the Boundary Waters? And it turns out that because the Boundary Waters is closer to the old industrial centers, downwind to the Rust Belt, that it has higher mercury levels. So, sometimes these things can be a little bit counterintuitive. And DNR will also test for, I think, PCBs. So some of those industrial chemicals. So some of our waters, downstream of manufacturing still have some of those chemicals. But then the one that we don't know about yet is the PFAS. That's, we're just starting to scratch the surface of how abundant those are in our waters, and I think there hasn't been a whole lot of research done yet about how prevalent is it in fish. But for a lot of these things, I think like with mercury, it's not like you can never eat fish. It's just moderating your intake. A certain, only eats so many meals a month, and for the fish higher up on the food chain is often how it gets expressed.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I know we've got a lot of different people joining us this evening. We have Dr. Claire Ruby on, and she probably has a few comments to make because she's done quite a bit of research in this arena. And in fact, her and some of her students are going to be our next Watershed Talks program, April 21st. So, Dr. Claire,
And
want to say?
there's a comment from Claire here. Go ahead,
Oh,
Claire.
here we go.
Yeah, I did. I just commented that I have a student who's interested in testing fish in Easter Lake for PFAS because we know PFAS are coming off the airport into Frank Creek over there by the Izaak Walton Lake, but also into Yater Creek, headed west into Easter Lake in Des Moines. And we're learning about how to do that. My favorite part of this story is that in the lab they use tofu as a like model for fish tissue, and they demonstrate how to grind it up and everything in the process. But yeah, so we're working up at Iowa State to learn how to do that, and hoping to, once we know what we're doing, then we might apply for some grants to do it more broadly. But it's a big question. So yeah, I think that Dan and I probably, have given a lot of these talks, and everybody, the fact that the rivers are used for so many different reasons, so many different outcomes, makes it really hard to answer those questions. And I've started to say, after all these years, the drinking water's got to be the priority. The nitrate in drinking water, I mean, just because of the public health impact. And we've talked a lot about cancer, and there's a cancer report coming out this month yet from Iowa Environmental Council and Harkin. But we have thyroid disease, we have reproductive issues, infertility that can be related to pesticides. So as the conversation goes on, there are even some statistics that show our farmers have lower rates of cancer than our non-farmers in the state overall. But I don't think that proves our water quality is okay. And so we have to be a little bit careful of, tying all of our desire, information and ways of motivating people to clean up the water, to one thing. But nitrate really probably should be our priority, just for the amount of cost, both public cost and health costs associated with it. But yeah, these recreational issues and fish ingestion, each pathway, each contaminant behaves differently. But I'm gonna go with Dan on this one. I try to get my family out in the water. I go with Nate Hoogavan because he can tell me where it's safe to go. Helps to have somebody with you who knows the rivers well. But yeah, I get out even though I actually count the pathogens in the water and other things. So I think it's really important, and it's the only way we're going to get people to care about it. But you guys should all come and see my students talk about their work April 21st.
Yes, 21st. And we'll have information with a link soon, and a Facebook event page set up.
Sweet. Nice work, Dan. I'm going to steal your slides for my class.
Yeah, that's great. It's really, really good. So who's going to be taking your place, Dan, at the Prairie Rivers of Iowa? I'm sure it's a huge loss to have you move forward into another position.
Well, we're just writing the job description now, so we don't know that yet, but it seemed like there was a lot of applicants for the position I applied for, so it seems like there's a lot of talent out there, so hopefully we can get that filled quickly.
That's great.
And did you say you were going to Story County?
Yes, so I'll be the...
Yeah, I see Jim P's celebrating over there.
You're still in the hood, so to speak, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, so it'll be doing a little bit more of the working on conservation projects, but still quite involved in the water monitoring and in the public education. So
great.
Yeah. There's a lot of work, that's for sure. And we're super grateful for all the great voices we have in Iowa. It's amazing that we're at where we are, especially with all the work on the ground, with all these brilliant people we have in our state. It just blows me away that, we're where we are, but yet we've had all these brilliant people here in our state, and I'm super grateful for that. I just wish we could see a little different shift in our environment. So
we've got a couple of other people who, thanks to Laura Merrick saying congratulations there. We've got Ruth Rabinowitz. Are you still in California?
Yes, and I joined late, so I didn't hear the conversation. We're at 90 degrees here. It's 20 degrees above normal here, climate change. So yeah, I head back to Iowa on April 24th, and I'm excited to get my garden planted, and yeah.
And tell everybody else, because I'm not positive I can say which river part you are on down there.
I'm in, maybe someone can tell me which watershed it is. It's in St. Charles, and I'm just to the east of Winterset, so I'm south of Des Moines, like 22 minutes, near Bevington. And I think it's Steel Branch Creek is the creek that's just south of my farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to get a map. Somebody else will have to help with that one. It's south of me, and I'm not that familiar. So we've got a couple of other people on here. I'm going to call. Cynthia Farmer, I see that you are on here. You want to?
Yes. Sorry, I'm having some connection issues, but so I can't turn my camera on, but
That's okay.
yeah.
Say hi and tell us what's up with you right now.
Yeah, I was just about to put
Oh,
Oh.
you may have to put it in the chat.
there, I'm back now.
There you
Okay,
go.
sorry.
Oh,
I don't know what's going on, but no, I was just about to put in the chat that I think it's the Middle River that Ruth is in, that watershed.
That sounds
And
right.
that's one of
Thank you.
Yep, that's one of the groups I'm working with actually right now. They're wrapping up their big comprehensive planning process. So we had a consultant firm hired, and I think their comprehensive plan is up to like 160 pages plus appendices. So a lot of things identified, a lot of opportunities there. Um, shall funding come available? But there is quite an active group who has been meeting quarterly and are planning to do a couple more outreach things this summer. So more to come there.
we'll watch for that.
Yeah. And then on other watershed things, the Winnebago River up in north central Iowa, they are the city of Clear Lake. I know Dan mentioned Clear Lake a couple times today, but they are, I think, well, it's official now. They've hired a watershed coordinator, and they're able to hire that person full time in a partnership with Mason City. So excited to have more people investing in the people to do this work, which I think is maybe one of the most important things, is to have a person there to help be that leader in the boots on the ground. So yeah,
That's great. Good
those are a couple
news.
of
Thanks, Cynthia.
definitely. Yeah. Happy. Thanks for presenting too, Dan, and congrats on the new role. I'm excited to support you there too. But yeah, thanks for having me tonight.
So I have another question for Denise O'Brien. I missed it yesterday, but I know that not yesterday, it would have been 2 days ago, Sunday, wasn't? The
Yeah.
Nishnabotna Water Defenders had a meeting and Liz Gar spoke, right?
Well,
And then,
the storm, the blizzard kind of got in our way. And
oh,
so
did it?
it's rescheduled, Chris, for Sunday, March 29th at the Memorial Building in Atlantic, and Liz will be presenting. And we'll also, you've watched the news lately, we just filed suit against New Co-op and in Red Oak. And so we'll be going over what we've done to get there and what we're planning to do.
That's what I saw was
Yeah.
the announcement of the suit that was filed. So that
Yes.
was now is that 1 year or 2 years since that happened?
Two.
We had to have it in just at the before the end of 2 years. So we
So
got
you
it in.
got
Yeah.
good enough.
Yeah. And getting a lot of mileage. Lots of people it's really causing a stir, you might say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have the voices amplified.
So will you make sure that you get that information or that somebody gets that information back out to Christine so that
Yeah.
we can get it out on the airwaves?
Yes, we just finalized plans today. We found a new venue. We made sure everybody could make it. So yeah, March 29th in Atlantic at the Memorial Building. We'll have it all out here shortly.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. If I think we're good unless anybody else has a comment or a question.
Mary Ellen Miller has been raising her hand, so I've seen it go up a couple of times. So,
Mary
Mary
Ellen,
Ellen, do you have something again?
Well, it wasn't a hand raise, it was an applause. But I do have a question for Dan. I think sometimes people are confused about the impact of drought. I live in South Central Iowa. We're going to probably go into our 4th year of drought this year. And could you kind of explain to people what happens after a long stretch of drought with rivers and why the nitrate load goes up following a long drought? Because I think people don't make that connection because the nitrogen is held, the excess nitrogen is held in the soil, and then we have a big spring flush of rain. Kind of talk a bit and explain to people why that's not a good thing.
Yeah, so what sometimes happens during a drought is that you have lower yields, and then so nitrogen that would have been used by the crop is now left over in the soil, and then the next time you get a big rain, it's going to get flushed out. So, essentially it's fertilizer that should be getting used for the crop and that is now going into the rivers. And the other thing that happens during a drought that I've been noticing is you see a lot more influence from wastewater treatment plants, from meat packing plants, from the point sources, because you might have a steady stream of water coming out, and during a wet spring, that's just a drop in the bucket. But sometimes there are creeks that would otherwise dry up and are almost entirely fed by effluent. So that's where we've kind of seen the high chloride from water softeners, high phosphorus from wastewater. So and that's as far as the dead zone in the Gulf goes. If there's not much flow in the river, then not much is getting to the Gulf. But can have an impact on fish in the stream, and certainly what our volunteers are measuring.
Question: does the cover crop take that up over the winter, that extra nitrogen, or just partially the rye and radish and oats and things like that? Dan?
Yes, and so I'd say that following a drought, cover crops are going to be especially valuable for holding on to that excess nitrogen. Now, the tricky thing is that sometimes you don't get good establishment when you got to if you have a dry fall coming off a dry.
So last year we had like
summer.
pretty good crops, so that wasn't a drought year, 2025.
No.
But I understand that broke the drought. That was like a 5-year drought. So we had one good year, 2025, and now we're in a drought again in 2026.
And 2025 was,
right?
I have some analysis of just kind of how weird 2025 was. It wasn't it was really patchy, so for most of the state it was dry in early spring through March, and it was dry in fall, and there was like this band of intense rain in May and June and July, that kind of this band across central Iowa. So it's like some parts of the state got more rain than average, and some parts of the state got less than average. So it was really kind of patchy.
All right, we're at 8:02. What do you think, Christine?
I
You want to
think-
do your wrap up?
Sure. I want to thank everybody for taking time out to be with us this evening, all about green, this for St. Patrick's Day, and our special guest speaker and everybody that has taken time together. So again, we'll be with Dr. Claire Ruby and a few of her students next month on April 21st. And we'll get that information out. So thanks again, and have a beautiful evening and stay warm. And I'm sure it'll be like 75 by the end of the week and all this snow will be gone. So welcome.
It's Iowa.
Yeah. I'm witnessing climate change firsthand right here in Surprise, Arizona, where it's 94 degrees today.
Oh.
So anyway.
Great to see everybody.
Yep.
Thanks for coming.
Good to
Thanks
see
for coming,
you.
everyone.
Thanks
Okay.
for the invite,
Bye-bye.
Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.